of my beautiful woman. So if you see him before I do, please give him my heart message so true. Tell him I ja from Venturian border, Umana come.
I'm Marilyn Laufer, Director of the Jewel Collins Smith Museum of Fine Art, and on behalf of our staff and our advisory board, I want to welcome and thank you for being here as we continue our campus-wide celebration of the 125th anniversary of our university accepting, I was corrected today, white women students. We are proud and grateful to those 3 pioneer women who, by breaking boundaries in 1892, opened doors for others. Thank you, Willie Little, Catherine Braun, Margaret Teague, for being fearless and hopeful, and thank you also to the Auburn Alumni Association and Women's Studies for their support of tonight's program. Special thank you to the theater department for making this venue possible, especially Taylor, who has kind of coordinated all of this with his own personal style and magic. So, I have decided to dedicate this program tonight to someone I greatly admired, an art historian's art historian. Just about a month ago, we lost her, one of the great feminist thinkers of our era. In January of 1971, Linda Nochlin, this art historian, published a seminal essay entitled, "Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?" in a magazine called Art News. The article single-handedly transformed not only our understanding of art history and the art world, but all areas of our culture. Nochlin also worked with Anne Sutherland Harris to curate an exhibition with an inspiring catalog entitled Women Artists, 1550 to 1950, which was featured at both the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and the Brooklyn Museum. This project brought to light artists that most of us had never heard of back then. Rosa Bonheur, Sonia Delaunay, Artemisia Gentileschi, Bert Morisot, Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, among many, many others, including Frida Kahlo. And today, we can't even teach French Impressionism without mentioning Bert Morisot. Nochlin not only revealed to us the various reasons that history had ignored these artists, often misattributing great works of art to male counterparts, but she also set the stage for others, like the Guerrilla Girls, who since 1985 have been using humor and outrageous performance to address issues of gender and ethnic bias and discrimination. Over 60 guerrillas over the years who, maintaining their anonymity under guerrilla masks, have directed our attention, and I'm quoting from their website, to the understory, the subtext, the overlooked, and the downright unfair. In the truest and oldest spirit of feminism, their efforts have been to fight and support human rights for all people, no matter how you identify, everywhere. So on behalf of all of us gathered here tonight, thank you for continuing to fight the good fight, for keeping those things that are significant and make a difference in the forefront, for criticizing discriminatory practices, for pointing out income inequality, for being fearless and hopeful, like the pioneer trio that entered Auburn University in 1892. Thank you, Linda Nochlin, for setting the way. Thank you, Guerrilla Girls. So please help me welcome our Guerrilla Girl for tonight, Frida Kahlo.
What's very good about our image is that when you look at our masks, you think of what we stand for. And we stand for the conscience of the art world. And we feel that there is underrepresentation of women and minorities. And when you see our logo, basically, when you see our face, that's what we stand for, and it's not personal.
Women artists artists have never gotten the serious attention and certainly not the serious money that male artists do. Why? The Guerrilla girls, who call themselves the conscience of the art world, have plastered their answer all over town.
Coming into the city right now, probably 65% of the young artists are females, and yet less than 10% have their work shown. And that's one of the reasons I'm a Guerrilla girl.
We believe that getting into a gallery or being shown in a museum even is for an artist an employment situation. The question was, how are you going to get women artists recognized when names, lives committed to art was completely ignored by the art history books? And so some of what we did was just attention getting.
Anonymous do-gooders like Robin Hood, Batman, Zorro, and the Lone Ranger.
Most of the women who are doing all the bitching are completely talentless. For example, like the top women artists, you don't hear them making these embarrassing feminist pleas. I mean, it's just that most women they don't have any talent and they're taking it out on men.
Everybody who attended the Museum of Modern Art this year went up to the information desk and said, gee, where are the women artists? They put them on the walls.
Anyone want a banana? Back here, I got bananas. Banana? Would you like a banana? Can you catch it? You all know what the banana is, don't you? Do I have to explain? Let me make this one really special, because this guy really wants one. That's for you. Bananas! Any more guys who can handle bananas? Here we go. Bananas. Bananas is our business. Would you like one? That's a long stairway. There we go. One more? I don't want to hit anyone. I don't have liability insurance. Here. There. Actually, you can hear me breathe here. Can you turn that down a little bit? Okay? There is a good principle that created order, light, and man, and an evil principle that created chaos, darkness, and women. Pythagoras, 6th century BC. Girls begin to talk and stand on their feet sooner than boys because weeds grow more quickly than good crops. Martin Luther, 1533. I consider women lawyers, writers, and politicians as monsters and nothing but five-legged calves. The woman artist is merely ridiculous. But I am in favor of the female singer and dancer, Auguste Renoir, beloved Impressionist painter. Dear group of communists, you're the strongest bunch of bitches gang together I've ever seen in world of art. Don't think to career you will make it 80. Best work of art a woman or girl can do is in bed, making well love, and sometimes procreate non-idiot females. Feminism is the reason for high number of AIDS statistics in the United States of America. Thanks to you, bitch feminists, if weakest men become gay and AIDS raise up in USA. A woman can be a genius. Do you remember the Holy Virgin, you damn bunch of whores? Answer me if you have the courage, bunch of bitches. That was an early letter to the Guerrilla Girls, written by an Italian art critic who put his calling card in the envelope. You know, it's so great to be back here in Alabama. This was really a staging ground for the civil rights movement, and where in another week or so you all will have the eyes of the country on you for a very important election. How many of you are going to vote? I won't ask you how you're going to vote, but those of you who didn't answer, is there anyone here who won't vote? Great. Okay. Because, you know, I have a feeling that a lot of you out there are as nervous as I am to know whose fingers are on the nuclear code buttons. So maybe we could start the whole evening out by letting out a little collective scream of relief, okay? You ready? 1, 2, 3. Woo! Okay, we are going. All right. I forgot all about the pictures. Oh no, I'm supposed to be showing you pictures. Okay. Here's a poster that we did right after the election last year. President Trump announces new commemorative months. Because one thing we've always been thinking about for many, many years is the struggle and the heritage of marginalized groups, and how once a year we come together to give each of these groups their own little commemorative month. But we're afraid that under Trump, these months will be renamed. African American History Month might just be replaced by Ku Klux Klan Month. And LGBTQ Month just might be replaced by Pray the Gay Away. Women's History Month, Supermodel Month. I'm Frida Kahlo, and I'm one of the founding members of the Guerrilla Girls. And I've been involved in just about everything the Guerrilla Girls have done since our beginning. And for those of you who might not be familiar with us, we're a group of feminists who have devoted our lives to fighting for all human rights and against the takeover of art and culture by the rich and powerful. Most of our work has been about discrimination and corruption in art, but we've also examined other issues like film, pop culture, gender stereotypes, war, and income inequality. And I'll show you lots of examples of our work tonight. So in 1985, we got an idea to put up 2 posters on the streets of New York about the state of marginalized artists in the New York art world. And I don't have to tell you, it wasn't a pretty picture. But we had a new idea about how to construct political art, how to take an issue and twist it around and present it in a way that hadn't been seen before. And bingo, the Guerrilla Girls were born. We're an anonymous bunch of artists who wear these gorilla masks in public and take the names of dead women artists as pseudonyms. And over the years, close to 60 individuals have been members of the Guerrilla Girls, some for weeks, some for decades, some can't even bear to stay for one meeting. But we have always been diverse in age, sexual orientation, socioeconomic class. We've been from many ethnic backgrounds: South American, Asian, South Asian, African American, Latinx, European, etc. And we've had cis and transgender members from the very beginning. We like to consider ourselves intersectional feminists, and we explore how race, class, ethnicity, gender identity, all of those elements affect human rights struggles. Who knew that our work would cause all hell to break loose? Who knew that it would cause a major crisis of conscience about diversity in the art world? And that was a subject that at that time in 1985, collectors and critics had ignored and denied for a long time, thinking that the art world was a meritocracy. Now it's a no-brainer. You can't tell the story of a culture without including all the voices of the culture in that story. But there is a ton of bias and corruption in the art world. Sorry.
They're going to go crazy.
Got it?
Let's see.
I could hear myself breathe. Okay, how's that? Can you hear me breathe? Okay, great. Now where was I? Okay, there's a ton of bias and corruption in the art world, and because artists get all caught up in the economy of it, it's hard for them to openly admit it. And that's why after 30 years, we feel that these masks are still so necessary. And our first 2 posters led to hundreds of others, plus street actions, billboards, stickers, books, not just about art, but about the worlds of film, politics, and pop culture. Who knew that 32 years later, the agitating outsiders would actually wind up inside the museums that we criticize, with exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Tate Modern in London, where a room of our posters is on display. And here we are, Andy Warhol and the Guerrilla Girls. That was really, we never expected that. It's the craziest kind of combination. Here we are in front of the Prado in Madrid, although our show was at the Reina Sofia. And some of our large-scale street projects have been in Rotterdam, Mexico City, Istanbul, Athens, and Shanghai. And retrospectives of her work have been held in Bilbao and Madrid. And right now, there is just a fantastic, unique, encyclopedic show of our posters, all in English, but at the Museum of Art in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We're just thrilled with the show. Oops, sorry, this is the show in, I'm going too fast. That's the show in Sao Paulo. We've been so lucky to do this work, and I am so grateful to the thousands of people like yourselves all over the world, ages 8 to 80, who write to us telling us that we have inspired them to do their own crazy kind of activism. Now, we started out sneaking around New York in the middle of the night, putting up posters all around the galleries and museums, and posters that revealed the truth about discrimination in the New York art world. And by the way, Donald, affixing a poster to a US mailbox like here is a federal offense. Now, we did it because we were pissed off. But the posters, to our surprise, caught everybody's attention, and everyone started talking about the issues. Now, this is an example of how bad things were. I mean, we weren't complaining because there weren't 50% this or even 13% this. This is what it was, 0, 0, 1, 0. And it was even more difficult for women artists of color. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm pointing it to the wrong place. So we did this intersectional poster. Only 4 galleries in New York show Black women, and only 1 shows more than 1. We will revisit this idea of tokenism a little bit later. And soon the word on the street was that the Guerrilla Girls were just a bunch of whining complainers, so negative. So we took this criticism to heart, and we decided to do a poster to help artists be more positive about their situation. Whoops. Here it is, the advantages of being a woman artist, some of which include working without the pressure of success, not having to be in shows with men, not being stuck in tenured teaching positions, not having to undergo the embarrassment of being considered a genius, having more time to work when your mate dumps you for someone younger, and getting your pictures in the art magazines wearing a gorilla mask. Now, this poster has been translated into many languages, and hardly a week goes by when we don't get letters from people in fields as diverse as veterinary science, music, physics, cartooning. We even got a letter from someone studying mortuary science, studying to be a mortician, telling us that our poster wasn't just about the art world, it was the story of their lives too. So a few years after this, we were invited to do a billboard in Manhattan by the Public Art Fund and to try out this crazy voice that we had developed on a larger audience. So one Sunday morning, we went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to conduct what we then came to affectionately call the weenie count. I think some of you know what the weenie count was. We counted naked males and naked females just to see what it might tell us. Well, if you've studied art history, you probably know what we found. When we went through the classical art section, almost all the naked figures we could find were male. When we went through the early Christian sections of the museum, well, we couldn't find any flesh at all. And when we went through the Renaissance and Baroque galleries, painting galleries, does anyone know what the only frontal nude figure we could find was? The baby Jesus. And it was only when we got to the 19th and 20th century, those early modern, eras, when sex replaces religion as the major preoccupation of European artists, did we find this statistic. So we appropriated this figure from the French painter Ingres. We took his odalisque, and we had the liberty of making her a Guerrilla Girl, and she asked the question, do women have to be naked to get into the Metropolitan Museum? And we had to back up that outrageous headline with some information. Less than 5% of the artists in the modern art section are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. Now, we would like to think that our work has made a big difference in the art world, but we have to admit old habits die hard and some museums still lag behind. So we went back to the Met a couple of years ago to see what had changed. We were sure that it had gotten better. This is what we found. Okay, fewer women artists, but more naked males. Do we have to consider that progress? So in the mid-1990s, the buzzword in the US art world had become multiculturalism. And art institutions were playing catch-up, showing one or two artists from each marginalized group. But what we noticed was that instead of showing the great diversity of artists from these groups, most museums were showing the same few artists over and over again. So we thought it was time to do a campaign about tokenism, applying intersectional theory to the art world and asking the question, is tokenism a solution or a continuation of the problem of exclusion? And here is our top 10 signs that you're an art world token. Every one of these things happened to a member of our group. Your busiest months are February, Black History Month, March, Women's History Month, April, Asian American Awareness, September, Latino Heritage, October, LGBTQ History and Disability Awareness, and November, Native American History Month. At parties and openings, the only other people of color are serving you the drinks. Whenever you open your mouth, it's assumed that you speak for your people, not just yourself. At parties and openings, everyone ends up telling you their interracial, gay, and transgender sexual fantasies. And lastly, a museum that won't exhibit your work gives you a prominent place in its lecture series. That has happened to us many, many times. But, recently we have been busier than ever, but we've been faced with a huge dilemma. What do you do when the system that you've spent your entire life attacking suddenly embraces you? Well, in 2005, we were asked to do a large-scale installation at the Venice Biennale. And as you noticed in the earlier slides, our work is now exhibited at museums all over the world. But what's an activist to do? We agonize over it, we stomp and argue and tear our hair out and consider each invitation very carefully to make sure that we are not being used. But we've made the decision in general to participate in exhibitions and appearances at museums because we really want to get our message out to as wide an audience as possible. And I have to tell you, it's really a thrill to criticize art institutions right on their own walls. So, what did we do in Venice? We did an installation of 6 17-foot high posters, the first time we went to that scale, that were the very first thing that viewers saw when they entered the main exhibition hall at the Arsenale. Then we took on the Venice Biennale itself. We wanted to document 110 years of discrimination, but we also wanted to declare it the first feminist Biennale. Why? Well, it was the first time in the history of the Biennale that 2 women were appointed directors of the exhibition. And surprise, it was the year of the highest number of women artists ever. Then we took a look at the historic museums of Venice because we discovered that every historical museum in Venice, except one, does have work by women artists in their collection. But the problem was almost all the work was not hanging in the galleries, it was down in the basement in storage. So we appropriated this iconic image of Marcello Mastroianni straddling Anita Ekberg from the classic Fellini film La Dolce Vita, and we asked the question, where are the women artists of Venice? Underneath the men. And what we did is demanded that viewers go to the museums of Venice and demand that they want to see more women on top. We hope the sexual innuendo wasn't wasted on it. Now, when the Washington Post gave us a full page a number of years ago as part of a special section on feminism and art, we designed our own tabloid, the Not Okay Guerrilla Girl Scandal Rag, to reveal the shocking truth about the low, low numbers of women and artists of color in our U.S. national taxpayer-supported museums on the Mall in Washington. And here it is. Horror on the National Mall. Thousands of women locked in basements of DC museums. Why does macho art world keep female artists out of sight? Now, it was really, interesting because when you work for, you do a project for the Washington Post, they have their fact checkers. So they had to check every fact that we used here. So, for example, they called the National Gallery and said, we're publishing this project, Sunday, and we want to check to make sure that at this moment there is not one artwork by an African-American artist on exhibit at the gallery. They said, we'll get back to you in the morning. The next morning, they called back the Washington Post and said, just overnight, we forgot to tell you we're reinstalling a sculpture by Martin Puryear, as though one was so much better than none. And the Hirshhorn, suddenly found works of art it never knew it owned. And by the way, this is how bad things were at our national taxpayer-supported museums. I don't think you can see the statistics, so I'll read them to you. At the National Gallery of Art, it was 98% male and 99.9% white, because one artist was being shown. The Hirshhorn Museum, which was modern and contemporary art, 95% male and 94% white. You know, we think a lot about this problem in museums, and we've always wondered if maybe, you know, museums that have, you know, names of dead male artists inscribed on their facades, we've wondered if maybe the architecture isn't really part of the problem. So we have a solution for museums like this, which is the Art Institute in Chicago. We would like to replace names like Leonardo, Michelangelo, you know, with artists like Artemisia Gentileschi, Frida Kahlo, Rosa Bonheur, Alma Thomas, and Claude Cahun. Now, speaking of Claude Cahun, we wrote about Claude in our bedside companion to the history of Western art. And Claude Cahun lived in France in the mid-20th century and made self-portraits in all manner of gender roles. In fact, Claude was born Lucy Schwab, and Claude's life partner and step-sibling, Suzanne Malherbe, also renamed herself, becoming Marcel. Some books on surrealism list Claude as a man, others as a woman, and we really think that art history needs some new vocabulary, just like the rest of culture, to describe artists like Claude Cahun. Now, don't get the wrong idea. We really love art and artists. But let's face it, while there are lots of people in the art world who love art, there are also lots of poseurs, snobs, gamblers, tax dodgers, inside traders, money launderers, and even a few criminals. The art market is, in fact, completely unregulated. It's been described as the fourth largest black market in the world after drugs, guns, and diamonds. So here's our version of the history of art museums, taken from the Guerrilla Girls Art Museum activity book. A brief history of museums. It all began because rich people have always had a lot of stuff. And when kings and queens, emperors and aristocrats ran out of space for it in their palaces and museums, they needed somewhere to store it. Bingo, we got art museums. In many countries, museums became part of the government and are run by bureaucrats and civil servants. But in the US, most museums are funded and overseen by super wealthy art collectors, the 1% of the 1%. Now, we're happy to say that your museum here is not. It is a public museum, run by a teaching institution. So much of what we're saying does not apply here, and you should be aware of it. But you can still ask questions. Books, music, and film are cheap, and they can be owned by everyone. But art is really expensive, and only the super rich can buy it. And once collectors spend all that money, they want their investments to appreciate in value, which tends to happen when art is shown and donated to museums. And US museums receive so little government funding, they survive on donations from rich collectors. And in turn, the collectors serve on the museum boards, get huge tax deductions, and can influence what the museums show. For example, Alfred Taubman, who was the chief stockholder of a major auction house in New York City, was also on the painting and sculpture committee of the Whitney Museum at the same time. Now think about it. He knew in advance what the Whitney would acquire and show, and that's information that was very, very helpful to his art business. Now, it doesn't take a genius to realize that this system is ripe for corruption. In other fields, this kind of insider trading is illegal, but no one mentions this in the art world. It's American capitalism at its finest. So, I know a lot of you out there really love art and know a lot about it, so let's take a little art quiz, okay? Of the top 100 art auction sales from 2011 to 2016, how many were women artists? Anyone want to guess? 1. What does art by famous females cost compared to art by famous males? 1/3? 16%. The highest sale ever for a living female artist, $9.7 million for a Katie Noland, is only 16.6% of the highest sale for a guy, $58.4 million for Jeff Koons. Can you make money from a museum while you're on the board of directors? Yes, $111 million says yes, because that's what Count Giuseppe di Panza was paid for selling part of his art collection to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles while he was on the board of directors. He also sold other work for his collection that very same year to the Guggenheim for $30 million. Okay, getting a little more contemporary. What is one of the economic forces behind the new Guggenheim Museum in Abu Dhabi? Debt bondage. Foreign workers at the Guggenheim and in the surrounding luxury zone are hired from South Asia. They're flown to the Emirates. And when they arrive, their passports are confiscated and their pay is nothing like what they were promised. And they're forced to live under inhumane conditions like this and work for a pittance. Moving on. What's more important to the Metropolitan Museum of Art than free speech? Money, you're on it. You're doing really well. You want to come up and finish the lecture? You know, the Met recently accepted $85 million from the ultra-right-wing Koch brothers, and those are the billionaires who spend even more than that undermining US elections. But what did the Met do after getting that money? Well, they held a big party, but then called in the cops to arrest a group of artists who were protesting outside by projecting this image onto the museum, identifying the Kochs as climate deniers. Now, the Met has the Koch brothers, but the Museum of Modern Art has Larry Fink. Larry Fink is a CEO of a multinational investment fund, BlackRock. He is a promoter of onerous student loans, and until recently, he was a member of Trump's Business Advisory Council. We did this action against him inside the Metropolitan Museum, along with Occupy Museums, and also the Illuminator was projecting on the outside, because we wanted everyone who visited the museum during the College Art Association convention to know what kind of people are running those places. And speaking of billionaires, here's a stealth campaign we did in New York in 2015. We put up stickers about income inequality, going after art collectors, galleries, and museums. Here it is again. We were able to take that picture right in front of the Museum of Modern Art. Dear Art Museum, art is so expensive, so is constructing new buildings. We totally get why you can't pay all your employees a living wage. And, you know, there are collectors and donors who do advocate for a different art world and collect art by diverse artists, but today there are way too many collectors who use art as an investment. And I'd like to play a little video that was done of this project because we were able to project this sticker on the side of the Whitney Museum on the night that the new museum opened up. Completely uninvited. Some people thought it was a project by the museum.
So the world of artists is great, but the art world sucks. The super rich are controlling the museums, sitting on the boards.
Power is being centralized into these few rich people. Like, it's really about the 1%.
Unfortunately, the art world right now appears to be about money and about the production of luxury items.
Billionaires are making more and more and more, and their taste controls which artists get the big bucks and get the opportunities and get the shows. We're planning to sneak around New York with the Illuminator. So we'll be starting out in Chelsea, and we hope to then go to the Whitney. So we had this idea to do something we could do really fast around New York and put these stickers up. Some of the stickers are about art galleries, about billionaires, billionaire collectors, and about museums. So we wanted to put them up where they belong, on the big galleries, on the museums, and give them out to people, especially so they could do the same thing. And it seemed like a great idea. Call the people together, just put the word out, see who comes, and just run around the streets and put these things up and bother people.
It's going to be a Saturday in Chelsea. People walking around feeling really good about having seen all this inspiring art, and all of a sudden they're going to see the wall above start talking to them. And it's going to say, "Dear art collector." We completely get it. Collecting art is so expensive. We really understand why you can't afford to pay all your employees a living wage. The wall is going to talk to them. Every time we put something up, people would go bananas. Some people would love it, some people would hate it. So we would sort of work in that space. It's really very productive to provoke people to think about things. And we discovered early on that if you could make someone who disagreed with you laugh, you had a hook inside their brain. Once you were in there, you just might be able to change their minds about things.
Okay, that's the end of that movie. As I said, there are many people, collectors, who are very diligent about collecting diverse art, but there are so many collectors who use art as an investment, and some even are creating their own museums so that they can have even more control over all the filters that, can make or break an artist's career. Here's a banner that we put up outside the Museum Ludwig in Cologne. Sorry, this is in German. Here it is in English. The advantages of owning your own art museum. Well, you're the boss. You call the shots, just like in your own business. You decide what art the museum collects and exhibits under the influence, of course, of a cartel of multinational galleries and auction houses who manipulate and define today's art market. At fancy parties, art fairs, and biennales, everybody sucks up to you and to your wallet. Your huge donations get you huge tax breaks, while people think that you're an incredibly generous philanthropist. And if you make the mistake of hiring, progressive, inclusive directors, curators, and staff, don't worry. You can just fire them. So we took versions of this sticker, a sticker of this banner, to the Frieze Art Fair in London, one of the sort of fanciest art fairs in the world, in October 2006. However, we were immediately busted when we started putting them up and giving them out. So much for freedom of expression at an art fair. So, as you can see, we think a lot about museums. And in the last fall a year ago, we opened 2 projects in London. And for one of them, which was at the Whitechapel Gallery, we decided to find out what museums think about themselves. So we sent out 383 questionnaires to art institutions all over Europe, and we made an exhibition out of the 101 responses that we received. Now, here's the show. And we didn't forget the institutions that ignored our questionnaire. They were right there in the show. They were on the floor, so people who could come could walk all over them. So what did we find? Well, it's so interesting what museums think of themselves, because we didn't do any independent research, we just worked with what they said about themselves. Well, only 2 of the responding institutions have more than 40% women artists in their collection. A Finnish museum that told us that women artists have been hugely important to them since 1861, but they only have 12% women artists in their collection. The Reina Sofia in Madrid said that they talked about diversity all the time, but their collection is still 87% male. And the billionaire Greek art collector Dakis Yannou told us that gender and race aren't important in his private art museum at all. The only thing that matters is pure talent. So we said, what planet do you live on? And the show ended up with this statement. Don't let art museums reduce art to the small number of artists who have won a popularity contest among big-time dealers, curators, and collectors. Unless museums show art as diverse as the cultures they represent, they're not showing the history of art, they're just preserving the history of wealth and power. Then, a week later, we did this project at Tate Modern because we were invited to be in residence there for a week. We created the first ever Guerrilla Girls Complaints Department. And over the course of a week, thousands of people came to complain and register their complaints on bulletin boards about art, gender issues, racism, politics, and even the museum itself. And we're really happy to say that this complaints department is traveling around the world. It opened up in Brazil at a Triennale in Sorocaba outside of Sao Paulo. And we want to take this to Washington. Yes. But, oops, oh, I didn't realize there were so many nice pictures in here. And there it is in in Portuguese. So let's cut, just so to show you that we don't, we know the art world, it's where we started out. But we have expanded our view to other areas of U.S. culture. And there is one area of U.S. culture that's even worse than the art world. And I guess it's pretty clear from this slide, that's Hollywood. The film industry likes to think of itself as an edgy and progressive and ahead of the curve. But if you look behind the scenes at the writers, the directors, the editors, you'll find that almost all of them are white males. So for a number of years, we rented billboards in Hollywood, just a few blocks from where the Academy Awards are held. And for our first one in 2002, we decided to put a little bit of realism into the Academy Awards. So we redesigned the Golden Boy to look a little bit more like the guys who take him home at night. The anatomically correct Oscar, he's white and male, just like the guys who win. Now, you can't just leave, an outrageous statement like that, unsubstantiated. So here are the facts. At that time, no woman had ever won Best Director. 94% of the writing awards had gone to men, and only 3% of the acting awards had been given to actors of color. And if you remember back in 2002, Well, that was the very year that both Denzel Washington and Halle Berry won Oscars for their performances. Now, we know they're great actors. They really deserve them. But we're convinced it was because of our poster. A few years later, Monique, Octavia Spencer, and Lupita Nyong'o became the 5th, 6th, and 7th black women in 86 years to win Oscars. Jeffrey Fletcher and John Ridley became the first black men to win for screenwriting. And then, of course, Catherine Bigelow became the first woman to win Best Director. And she was only the 4th ever nominated. So we'd like to take credit for that, too. And last year, 14 years later, in the midst of Oscars So White, we updated 3 of our anti-Hollywood billboards on the streets of Minneapolis. Here they are: the anatomically correct Oscar, an update of Unchain the Women Directors. Only 1 woman director had ever won the Oscar, only 4 have ever been nominated, and they were all white. And this our uptake of even the U.S. is more progressive than even the U.S. Senate is more progressive than Hollywood. Senate, 75% white guys. Film directors, 94% white guys. And let's move on to the music business, because Pharrell Williams, a number of years ago, invited us to be in a show in Paris about femininity, which of course is a totally charged idea. And we did a couple new posters for it, including this sort of version of our best-known poster redone to fit the music industry. Do women have to be naked to get into music videos when 99% of the men are fully dressed? And we've also done lots of posters about political and social issues as well. Oh, I'm sorry, does anyone recognize what this figure comes from? That's figures from the Blurred Lines. It was, the similarities were hard to pass up. Okay, so in 2009, we did a poster about hatred of and violence against women that appeared in the streets of Montreal on the 20th anniversary of the worst Canadian mass murder ever, when a gunman, claiming he was fighting feminism, entered the engineering school there, separated the men from the women. He said he was fighting feminism because it was ruining his life, and he shot 14 women studying engineering at the École Polytechnique. Our poster is actually a graffiti wall of sexist hate speech throughout the ages, from Confucius, who said, 100 women are not worth a single testicle, to Pat Robertson, who said, feminism is a socialist, anti-family movement that encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians. It struck us that it's still okay to publicly say things about women, and also trans women, that would be tolerated when said about other groups. Case in point, Donald Trump, who brags about, grabbing pussy and abuses women continually. And that brings us to this very moment when so many women, and also men and trans people, have been sexually harassed and abused in their workplaces with impunity. It's people in power take advantage of people, of their employees, and then the other people, guys in power, don't say anything about it. So I'm so happy that women now, every day, are speaking up, and men too. So here we are. Do we have another moment for a collective scream? Shall we also answer this by saying whether you're here too? Me too? Me too? Well, you're all lucky then if it was so few. Now, we're just back from Brazil, where intimidation from the far right caused the shutdown of this exhibition called the Queer Museum, and huge street protests ensued. And there was also a controversy in Brazil while we were there, where a preacher who claims he was defending women declared this mural with a vaginal image in the middle in extremely bad taste. And what we wanted to say is, we think vaginas are in really good taste. Okay, we take on, as you can see, all kinds of issues. And last year, we published a book that we had been working on for a long time about a topic that is very important to us, and that is the female body and how it's been treated throughout history. And I'm so excited to present it to you tonight, do a little reading from it. It's the hysterical history of hysteria and how it was cured from ancient times until now. And it also gives me the opportunity to sing to you. And I'm really sorry about that. Okay. Still crazy after all these years. Once upon a time, women in Europe and America suffered from a terrible female disease called hysteria. The symptoms were nervousness, fatigue, anxiety, insomnia, faintness, muscle spasms, shortness of breath, irritability, headaches, heaviness of the abdomen, fluid retention, lack of concentration, depression, loss of appetite for food or sex, ticklishness, and making trouble. Now, doctors claim that 2 out of every 3 women suffered from this awful affliction. Sorry, sometimes my teeth get itchy here. No one knew what caused hysteria, but the great minds of science decided that it must have something to do with women's mysterious female sexual organs. Something in the way she moves. In ancient Greece, Plato believed that the uterus actually wandered all around the female body, choking and strangling all functions as it went. Pleased to meet you, guess you know my name. No sympathy for the devil. In the Middle Ages, people thought that females who showed extreme symptoms of hysteria were possessed by the devil. They were witches. And we all know what the cure for witches was: burning at the stake and hanging. Hit me with your best shot. In the Renaissance, special instruments were developed to purge women of hysteria. Lots of Dutch houses had a wooden syringe like this in the outhouse. It was hollow, and it shot medicinal fluids deep into a woman's vagina to flush out that unsavory stuff in their side that caused hysteria. And in Italy, a device like the one at the bottom was used to fumigate female genitals with hot vapors. Ouch. And then there was Dr. Feelgood. We're not making this up. We're not making this up. This is absolutely true. Another treatment for hysteria, if you could afford it, involved a physician gently massaging the insides of a patient's vagina with aromatic oils. If the procedure was successful, the patient would fall into a frenzied state of moaning and groaning. Sometimes over and over again. It was not unusual for the patient to lose consciousness or even fall asleep. When revived, she was in a calm state of relaxation. Cured. until her next episode of hysteria. Some patients were fortunate to have the procedure as often as once a week. And it proved especially effective on virgins, widows, and nuns. Sometimes the treatment would just take a few minutes. Sometimes it took hours. What a lot of work for those doctors. Now let's take a reality check here. In the 19th century, doctors gave patients orgasms and got paid for it. Is that health care? Or is it prostitution? Good vibrations. After the electric motor was developed in the 19th century, doctors came up with so many exciting new ways to treat that ever-present problem of female hysteria. They used newfangled vibrating machines like these directly on their patients' genitals. And once electricity became available in private homes, the cure for hysteria could be administered right in the privacy of one's own bedroom. Portable vibrators appeared 10 years before vacuums and irons. And Sears had a special version with attachments, and once the patient felt better, she could clean the house with the same machine. Girls just want to have fun. Well, the porn industry discovered the vibrator in the 1920s, and psychiatrists were horrified to see right there on the screen a medical device used for sexual pleasure. And suddenly, vibrators were declared lascivious and immoral, and stores stopped selling them. As late as 2008, it was a crime to sell vibrators in Texas. And I believe it's still illegal to sell them here in Alabama. I'm glad you're up on that fact. I guess I don't have to do that research again. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. You know, vibrators became the best friend of many a girl, except here in Alabama, and are still at the center of a thriving sex toy industry. But around 1952, the medical profession suddenly dropped hysteria as a serious female disease. Now, those feminists among you realize that that was the very same year, or the same era, that Simone de Beauvoir published her manifesto, The Second Sex, which really jump-started the women's liberation movement in the United States. Coincidence? Well, we think that feminism helped everyone understand how society had constrained, misunderstood, and mistreated female bodies over the century. So maybe feminism was the medicine that cured the disease of hysteria. Okay, a few years ago, we're getting close to the end. A few years ago, the Guerrilla Girls gave our first ever commencement address at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, in front of 4,000 cheering people and more than a few angry parents. It became our manifesto. It's the Guerrilla Girls' Guide to Behaving Badly, which you have to do most of the time in the world as we know it. And we've made a video version of it, this call to action, and I'm going to end my presentation tonight by playing it for you.
The Guerrilla Girls' Guide to Behaving Badly, which you have to do most of the time in the world as we know it.
Be a loser. The world of art doesn't have to be an Olympics where a few win and everyone else is forgotten. The art market and its hyper-competitive celebrity culture makes everyone but the stars feel like failures. But there's another world out there that's not about raging egos, a world of artistic cooperation and collaboration. That's the one we join, and we invite you to join it too. Let's make trouble together.
Be crazy. Political art or activism that points to something and says, this is bad, is just preaching to the converted. Instead, try to change people's minds and do it in some unforgettable way. A trick we learned is humor helps you fly under the radar. If you can get people who disagree with you to laugh at an issue, you have a hook right into their brain. Once there, you have a much better chance to convert them.
Be anonymous. Sometimes you gotta speak out publicly, but sometimes it works even better to speak out anonymously. Now this has its disadvantages, like working your whole life without getting any credit, but it has lots of advantages too. Our anonymity, for example, keeps the focus on the issues and away from our personalities. The mystery of who we might be draws lots of attention to the issues we promote. Plus, you won't believe what comes out of your mouth while wearing a gorilla mask.
Be an outsider. Even if you're working inside the system, we say act like an outsider. Seek out the understory, the subtext, the overlooked, and the downright unfair. Then, expose it. Jam your culture. Remake your institution.
Just do one thing. If it works, do another. If it doesn't, do another anyway. Don't be paralyzed if you don't get it right every time. Just keep chipping away. We promise that bit by bit, your efforts will add up to something effective.
Artists, don't make only expensive art that billionaire art collectors can afford. Curators, don't exhibit only the expensive art your trustees donate. Let's have more cheap art that everyone can own, like books, zines, music, and movies, like our posters.
Show museums tough love. It's unethical that wealthy art collectors who invest lots of money in art can become museum trustees overseeing institutions that in turn validate their investments. It's a lousy way to write and preserve our history.
Demand ethical standards inside museums. No more conflicts of interest or insider trading. No more cookie-cutter collections of art that cost the most. Convince art collectors their collections are inferior with only work by white male artists. Don't let museums perpetuate this version of art and power with a few tokens thrown in. Make sure your favorite museum casts a wider net and collects the whole story of our culture.
Whether you work in a museum or a classroom, don't teach an art history constructed by corrupt institutions. Do like we did. Write your own.
Complain, complain, complain. Be a creative complainer. Be a professional complainer. Don't assume people know what's missing from museums. Remind them how many modern and contemporary art collections still contain less than 15% females and artists of color.
Use the F word, feminism. We think it's crazy that so many people who believe in the tenets of feminism are still afraid to call themselves feminists. Feminism doesn't get the respect it deserves. Women's rights, civil rights, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights, and Black Lives Matter are the great human rights movements of our times.
Feminists like us who believe in intersectionality fight for all human rights. No one is free until everyone is free.
Feminism is changing the world. It's revolutionizing human thought, giving many people lives their great-grandparents could never have imagined. But there's still so much work to do. There are so many countries worldwide where LGBTQ people and women have little or no human rights.
90% of transgender employees have faced discrimination or harassment at work. In the US, no federal law protects them, even though nearly 80% of voters support such a law. Then there's rampant sexism in the tech industry, including the harassment of female gamers. And what about the gender earning gap that the US Congress refuses to move against?
Violence and abuse against women, gay, and transgender people is still a huge international problem. From gang rape in India to kidnappings in Nigeria to sexual slavery by ISIS to the negligible punishment given out for domestic violence in America. Trans women are assaulted and even murdered in the US.
But despite all this bad news, feminist resistance movements are exploding all over the world. Let's make the F word feminism the F word for the future. Let's all join together with feminists on the right side of history.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to your wonderful, unusual, unique museum for inviting us here. Thank you. Now it's your turn to ask a question, make a complaint, do your own rant, give us some information. Any takers? Yes.
I was really
speak up loud.
I was really upset to learn buy our book. But you know, our book is just a kind of populist version of the great scholarship that has been done by, you know, women, well, feminist art historians, they're not all women, feminist art historians for years. So I'm sure if you go to your library here and just do a quick search, you will find books that will keep you going forever. Yes? Yes.
Most people, when they think of minorities, they think of men of
Yeah.
color. And so we need to just call a spade or an unspade a spade. You know, we need to say white women and people of color, or we need to say women and men of color, because otherwise that intersectionality gets lost and it hurts women of color, especially black women, in so many ways.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's a really good point. A lot of these posters were done 30 years ago, and one thing we've noticed is how vocabulary changes. And one thing I brought up as soon as I arrived today, I said, is this the 100th anniversary of women at Auburn or white women? And the sad thing is that women, African-American women, didn't come to the university until the mid-60s, correct? A point of criticism and an analysis to realize that universal suffrage is the goal, and we haven't gotten there yet. As a matter of fact, it might even be the idea of representative democracy is diminishing. That's why you all have to get out and vote next week. The world is watching you. Do the right thing. Yes?
I moved to New York 25 years ago to start graduate school. Linda Nochlin was one of my teachers, and I've been horrified to see how expensive museums have gotten in that relatively short amount of time. I was just wondering if you all, I really appreciated the posters about how underpaid most museum staff are, but I was wondering if you also are tackling the cost of just getting into a museum in the first place as a visitor.
Oh, absolutely. And whenever there's a suggested entrance, I give them a dime. Yeah, I mean, it is outrageous. And that is an important thing for, thank you for, reminding us. The list of things we still have to do keeps getting longer and longer and longer. We need some fountain of youth to get it all done. But your museum here is free, isn't it? Absolutely free. So you can wander in that museum anytime. And there are some wonderful shows there right now, which I had the privilege of seeing this afternoon. So if you haven't been there in the last 2 weeks, go tomorrow. Yes, in the back. No, you. Yeah. What is that? What is it?
I'm saying I grew up here my whole life. With my shirt?
Yes.
It says no more.
Oh, thank you. We can't see it. We can't see it. Thank you. No more. Yeah, I didn't present that Me Too right, but I won't ask it again. I'm sure that those of you out there know about the hashtag Me Too, and that this is the time to have the courage to speak out. And I don't know whether you know about the website Callisto. It is a special website where you can name an abuser. It's a college website. You can name an abuser. It is not posted publicly, but if someone else names that same person, the two of you are put in contact with one another. So check it out. If any of you have had experiences that are too hard to talk about, and it's there to help you and also protect you. Yes?
So
it sounds like you think there is a disconnect.
I feel the importance of the message. I truly do. I think it's important to continue speaking the message, but I wonder if the medium is in need of evolution to continue being as strong.
Oh, absolutely, sure. I mean, we started out by putting posters up in the street. You know, those early posters were press typed. We didn't even typeset them. They were before computers were used. So yeah, I would love to be superseded, and not even superseded. It's not a question of replacing. I think it's a question of we need more feminist masked avenger, or maybe not masked avengers, just feminist avengers, than just one group. That's why, we encourage you to go out and do your own crazy kind of activism and not rely on us. Deal with your own issues in your own time in your own place. We just consider ourselves a kind of model, and we're hardworking girls. You won't read about the inside of my apartment in the New York Times Magazine. I mean, we're not making any money on this. We still live like, middle-class school teachers, if even that. Most of us have day jobs, actually. Yes?
How does someone support the Guerrilla Girls, or maybe eventually become a Guerrilla Girl?
Well, you want to hear the good news or the bad news first? All right, the bad news is it's really hard for us to incorporate everyone who wants to be a Guerrilla Girl into our group. We would be an employment agency, a feminist masked avenger employment agency. That's the bad news. But the good news is you don't have to join us to do what we do. Join with, kindred spirits, people who do what we did. We got together, a bunch of us, we were angry, and we started doing things, and we saw what worked and what didn't work. We realized we had to do things in some unforgettable way, and just go with it. I mean, this is a wonderful time for creative activism. I mean, it's everywhere. Did any of you go to the march, the Women's March in Washington? I mean, wasn't it incredible, all the placards and the outfits and the performances? It was just great. You don't need us. You have everything you need to be a Guerrilla Girl. Sure. Masks are really helpful. You can say whatever you want when you have a mask on, especially a gorilla mask, to reclaim, the idea of this fierce, gorilla. And it's a lot of fun, I have to tell you. It's been a lot of work, a lot of things I gave up that I can't do because there aren't enough hours in the day. But I would never do it differently, because it is, when you can affect a little bit of social change, and it takes a lot of patience because it doesn't happen overnight. You make a lot of mistakes, like, do one thing, if it works, do another. If it doesn't work, do another anyway. You have to really keep that in mind. And we have to realize how detached our government is from who we are and what we want. And I think it's really important now to be activists and to, claim the vibrant, diverse, turbulent culture, and make sure that no matter what happens in Washington, we are still here to resist it. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks. Thank you.